We'll now begin our service with the lighting of the chalice.
Sonnet 60 by William Shakespeare. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. Each changing place with that which goes before, in sequent toil all forwards do contend.
We're going to move right along to a clarification of what we mean by green burial, led by Betsy Buck.
Good morning. So what is green burial? Green burial is defined by Green Burial Massachusetts, Inc. as a way of returning bodies to the earth after death. Called green burial for its ecological soundness, it is commonly known as natural burial. In conventional burials in the U.S., formaldehyde and other chemicals, metals, hardwoods, and concrete enter the environment. Cremations have become more popular in recent years. However, cremations use large amounts of fossil fuels and contribute to air pollution. In a green burial, there is no embalming, no burial vault or grave liner, and the body is placed in the earth in a biodegradable casket or shroud. Depending upon where the burial occurs, there may be a traditional gravestone, a flat marker, a natural stone marker, a biodegradable marker like wood, or no marker at all. With green burials, the body is able to biodegrade naturally and fertilizes and enriches the soil. We have a slideshow that has examples of what the biodegradable caskets or shrouds look like. So all of these are examples of how a body might be returned to the earth. Thank you.
Two themes, nature and mortality, come together this morning in our service. Are they ever apart? Really? Our two speakers today are both from Chilmark. Both are gifted in their ability to put words together. Their life work, in both cases, has centered in nature. Rebecca Gilbert's farm is called Native Earth Teaching Farm. How much closer to nature can you get than that? Ursula is a retired professor of biology. Her recently revised and republished book is called The Sacred Depths of Nature. They will both answer the same question: why have I chosen green burial for myself? There's a little surprise. Ursula is going to speak first, and then Rebecca. And then following the two talks, between the two talks, we're going to hear from Steve, but following, we'll just go right into our favorite song, Spirit of Life. Then we'll hear Peter's wonderful original song and closing words from Christine. So, Ursula.
Good morning. You hear me up in the bleachers? Yeah? Okay. Good morning. So, I was a Christian for 2 weeks. I was 8 years old, and there was a little boy down the street who was Catholic, and he explained to me that if you believed in Jesus Christ, that when you died, you would go to heaven and live forever. And I had never heard that bargain, but it sounded like a great deal to me. So I harbored it and dispersed with any fears of death that I had, and then shared it with my parents. And my father looked at me in his professorial way and said, "Ursula, that's not what happens. When animals die, when people die, they are dead. There's nothing else after that. It's like before you were born." Somehow I knew, even at 8 years old, that he was right, and I was also devastated. I remember clearly going up to my bedroom and sobbing in my bed. But then I lived the rest of my life that way. I have come as a biologist to see death as an important part of our evolutionary process and have written a book about it. But this didn't solve the problem of what to do with my dead body, since it wasn't going to go to heaven. And so for a long time, throughout most of my adulthood, I sort of figured I'd be cremated because that's what everybody did, and that's probably what a lot of you have just assumed, was that that was the sort of the simplest way of thinking about it. But I started to read and come to understand that cremation had several problems. One is that, as is outlined in the handout, enormous amounts of fossil fuel have to be used to get the ovens hot enough to do the deed. And the other part that's more important to me as a biologist is that when that's all done, your body is reduced to sort of elemental carbon. It's just, it's ash, it's C, okay? And that can then, via our life cycle processes, eventually get incorporated into bodies and into useful sugars and amino acids and so on. But our bodies have these things in spades. We're just loaded with this wonderful kinds of molecules that are already made and all ready for the creatures in the earth to use to continue their lives. So being reduced to elemental carbon didn't make that much sense to me. There's a positive side to cremation, of course, which is that these ashes, once they are possessed, can be scattered. You can put them out to the sea, you can divide them up among children. I've heard people doing that. There's lots of things that can be done with these ashes. But I've also gotten in touch with my need to have my body, have my molecules be part of a place where an ecosystem occurs. And my place now and until I die is Martha's Vineyard. I wanted to be here. So I began to inquire about the green burial option that I had heard about. I first heard about it actually at the funeral of Paul Cowan. I don't know whether any of you remember Paul Cowan. He lived in New Hampshire, and he died way too early. And I went to his funeral in New York City and was told that the funeral had to hurry up because they had to get his body on a plane because they had to bring it to Martha's Vineyard and get him in the ground in 48 hours, because that is how the Jewish funeral rites have always occurred. They have not used any embalming or cremation. The whole thing has always been to have a green burial in that tradition. And then it came up very close and personal when my previous husband, Paul Levine, died at the ripe old age of 96. Some of you may know Paul. He was very active in the West Tisbury Library. And so he had opted for a green burial, and I went to the burial. And they brought him out from the hearse in a gurney, and he was completely wrapped in this wonderful, beautiful quilt. And they carried it over, and they sort of tipped it over gently, and he rolled, and I heard this thump in the ground. And that was so cool. This was a body of a man that I loved and cherished, who was thumped into our island. And as we then put the earth over him and the flowers and gave him our love, he was there. He was real to me, and I think to all of us. So as has been said, green burials are legit if you opt for a pine box, if being dumped into the earth isn't your idea. But it doesn't have to even be a box, and that's what I've elected for myself. So then the final thing was finding a place, and so Susan, if you live in Chilmark, Susan Murphy is the way to go. West Tisbury also has it. I also understand that Oak Bluffs has just announced it. And I think it's really important, no matter what your decision, that you make your plans now, not when there's a sudden unexpected death, or even when you are dying and you have lots of other things to think about besides this. Your family really appreciates that this is all taken care of. So I've gone to Chapman Funeral Place. I've paid the full price. They tell me it won't go up even if I live to be 120. So it's a good investment now. I have my plot in Chilmark and the Abels Hill Cemetery. I have my stone. It's all ready to roll, so that when my family has to deal with my death, however they do that, this is one thing that they don't have to worry about. So I encourage you to give this your thought. If it isn't for you, fine. There's no guilt trip here. But it's a wonderful option that I hope you explore.
They almost forgot me. They've heard me read before. Okay. So the responsive reading is 555 from the Spiritual Tunes book here. So I will say something to you, and then you tell me what you think. Some things will never change.
Some things will always be the same.
The voice of forest water in the night, a woman's laughter in the dark, the clean, hard rattle of raked gravel, the cricketing stitch of midday in hot meadows, the delicate web of children's voices in bright air.
These things will never change.
The glitter of sunlight on roughened water, the glory of the stars, the innocence of morning, the smell of the sea in harbors.
These things will always be the same.
The feathery blur and smoky budding of young boughs, and something there that comes and goes and never can be captured. The thorn of spring, the sharp and tongueless cry.
These things will never change.
The leaf, the blade, the flower, the wind that cries and sleeps and wakes again, the trees whose stiff arms clash and tremble in the dark, and the dust of lovers long since buried in the earth. All things proceeding from the earth to seasons, all things that lapse and change and come again upon the earth, these come up from the earth that never changes. They go back into the earth that lasts forever. The tarantula, the adder, the asp will also never change. But under the pavements trembling like a pulse, under the buildings trembling like a cry, under the waste of time, under the hoof of the beast above the broken bones of cities, there will be something growing like a flower.
Something bursting from the earth again, forever deathless, faithful, coming into life again like April.
Amen.
Good morning. So I'd like to start by telling you about my last visit with our mutual friend Barb. Sam Green and I went over there and had a really nice final visit with her. And one thing that she was very clear about was that she wanted a green burial. And as you know, those of you that knew her, she was a science teacher all her working life. And once she retired, she got a lot of joy out of volunteering at Poly Hill. So it gives me a lot of joy that her family was amazingly, given so little time, able to make that happen, and that she is buried within birdsong distance of Poly Hill. And I think she would have been very pleased to know that. So I wanted to share that with you. But it is, as Ursula said, much easier if you pre-plan. So I recommend that also. What I wanted to talk to you about beyond that was some of the way that I approach this philosophically and as an earth worshiper. Barb often attended our seasonal celebrations or rituals, and oftentimes what we do in that tradition is talk about the four directions and the four elements. So I'm just going to quickly run through the four elements in terms of disposal of bodies, but also in terms of how we deal with those things that used to be useful to us, but now they no longer are. So of course, our bodies are a very personal and central aspect of that once we die, this is something that has been so important to us, but it's no longer needed by us in the same way. So that is something that we need to release at that time. And for the families and friends of that person, that is also the aspect of them that we need to release while we continue to hold on to their love and their teachings. However, the only time we need to release things is not when somebody dies. We do it all the time. We have to release old habits, old ways of thought, things we might have been taught that turn out to be no longer useful. We're always shedding even skin cells as we walk through life. So these techniques for releasing are very central when applied to our physical selves, but they can also be used for other things like rotten old ideas and things like that. So I feel that it's a good idea to practice releasing those things that we carry that are no longer needed as we go through life, not only because it unburdens us as we go along, but kind of as practice for when we have to do that big release at the end. So just to quickly run through the elements, we usually start in the east with air, and that has to do with dawn and new beginnings, but also with words and thoughts. Like air, words and thoughts are not visible, but they're so important and they're powerful, and they can really make changes in the environment, even though you can't exactly put your finger on them. So when someone's ashes are tossed into the air, or when our words are spoken into the wind, these are ways that we release things using the element of air. And even dropping a feather and seeing where it goes is a way to let go of things and let them find their own paths going forward, no longer connected to us. There's a lot of traditions in places that don't have a lot of water where they use the birds of the air, such as vultures, to dispose of their corpses. And it's felt that they go almost to heaven that way. So speaking into the atmosphere is one way to unburden. Then if you turn to the south, the element is fire. We've talked about cremation. Viking funerals are another tradition. And fire is often used as a way of deep cleansing and releasing. Sometimes in rituals we write things on pieces of paper or on sticks and put them in the bonfire as a way to release them. Fire is really drastic. It's really quick, and it's very instantly transformative. And there are some occasions that call for that. You're a body, and then you're plain old carbon. And that can be a little too quick and drastic for some situations. For others, it's perfect. To the west, we have the element of water. We're all familiar with using that to cleanse away that which we no longer need, like yesterday's sweat when we go into the shower, and washing away things that aren't helping us anymore. But there's also, in terms of disposal of bodies, I have always felt that the ideal for me personally would be to be accidentally lost at sea. But it's good to have a backup plan. There are different kinds of water burials, and similar to being buried in the earth, that is a way that your components pretty quickly become part of the cycles of life. And in Celtic traditions, there are myths about a cauldron, a magical cauldron, where life began and where the dead are put in and reanimated, sometimes in a nice way and sometimes in a sort of zombie way, depending on what myth it is. But that cauldron of life has often been taken as a metaphor for the ocean. So another way that we intentionally release things that we're trying to get rid of is to either make a symbol of it or write it on something and throw it into running water. And we have a brook on the farm that has often been used for things like that. The ocean is, of course, always available here on the island. But in a pinch, in an urban environment, flushing things down the toilet also is effective. So water cleansing and releasing is another one. My personal favorite as a farmer and as a earth person, of course, is the earth element, coming around to the north to complete the circle. And this is what green burial, of course, takes advantage of. But I also work with it pretty much every day in the form of our compost heap. And especially this time of year, we realize how valuable the compost is. And that is on a very practical level. It's the first crop that we sell in the spring when we are broke and are trying to buy potting soil and all kinds of other farm things. But also it is really, for me personally, I would say it is one of the most exact metaphors for God. It just accepts everything, transforms everything so gradually that you can't quite see it happening, but you almost can, kind of like the moon setting last night. We put in our compost heap everything that we really don't want, everything that is slimy and disgusting and inedible and gross. Manure, of course, weeds that are not edible by goats, and corpses of animals all go into our compost. And the whole reason they go in there is because we really, really don't want them even lying around anywhere else. And yet, because of the process that happens in there, they come out after a year or two as something so precious to all the life forms. And the compost feeds the plants, and the plants feed everybody else. And if you are taking compost from one place to another and a clump of it falls on the ground and you don't pick it up, you will notice a few months later that that spot is more luxurious than the areas around it. If it falls into a clump of daffodils, there'll be one in the middle that's like 8 inches taller than all the rest and twice as big. It's really miraculous. And I feel it's quite literally miraculous. I know that there is a lot of science behind the many, many types of organisms that are invisibly at work in there. but it still seems like magic to me to put in something really gross and end up with flowers and fresh vegetables and fruits and greenery. And when I see the greenness coming back to the island right now, I know that it's because of all the things that died in the soil. And if you have a potted plant and you put even, not even alive, but a dead earthworm in there, that plant will show the benefits for over a year of that, the sort of cascade of soil activity that happens in order for that to break down and become part of the whole system of what's going on. And I think that is very, very beautiful and very, very holy. And I can think of nothing more honorable than being part of that process. And I don't know exactly what will happen to me personally. I love having a plan so that my loved ones don't have to do a lot of extra bureaucracy at the last minute. But I also know that life is very unpredictable, and if it's times of war or times of famine, maybe my corpse will be left by the side of the road, and that's the best that the people can do at that time. I'm not going to be too dictatorial about how it has to be, because who knows what the situation will be for the people at the time. And I know that we just have to do the best we can with what we know. But with what I have seen from observing the life and death cycles on the farm, is that the richness of the earth and the slowness of the earth and the deep transformation that the earth performs on everything that comes into it, whether it be manure or corpses or a seed, it all gets transformed into something better. So that is certainly what I hope for my my parts when I am ready to stop using them. Thank you.
Now, hymn number 123, then we'll hear from Peter, and then we'll have our extinguishing of the chalice. The lyrics are on the back of the order of service.
Yeah, I'll make it work. This feels so official. So I wrote all but the last verse of this song in my barn here on the Vineyard about 1991. And I guess I'm fairly agnostic, but I don't know what I don't know. I do know that people often have a very hard time leaving their loved ones goodbye at the time of this particular goodbye. And that's kind of what fed into this song. And certainly grew out of years of experiencing this as a physician. So I use metaphors like, now that I know you are here, Lord. I just feel like saying that for me they're metaphors. And the light and the transition is symbolized by them, but not necessarily captured by them. And when Peter asked me to do something for the Green Burial, he actually asked me to write a song for it. And being a little on the lazy side, I thought, well, I've got something close. But maybe I can add a verse. And as I said to Peter, I was very thankful that he invited me to do that, because for me, I'm much more familiar with this, and you'll possibly be hearing it once or reading it once. Her response represents a bit more of my own feelings. So do we hear this on Zoom? Yeah, I woke that night in the bed where I was dying. I saw a flash of light pierce the veil of gray. All my pain was gone, my breathing turned to sighing. I knew I'd never see another day. My wife stood by and I heard her crying. I tried to speak, had so much to say, but my voice was still no use in trying. I knew I'd have to find another way. I said, Lord, hear my prayer. Now that I know you're here, see how she cries, show her this heavenly light. I cannot leave till she believes. I looked below at the scene that was unfolding. A stranger came and covered up my face. Everybody left to where they must be going, except my darling who wouldn't leave that place. I said, Lord, hear my prayer. Now that I know you're here, see how she cries. Show her this heavenly light. I cannot leave till she believes. Then she pulled back the sheet and said, I know you hear me now. You'll hear me when I say, I'll miss you so. But now I know you're taking a great passage. Let me kiss you one more time before you go. I'll lay you 'neath the roots of our Katsura tree and watch you be reborn in every spring. As your fire will warm the hearth of every autumn, you can go and know the comfort you will bring. She said, Lord, hear my prayer. Now that I know you're here, help him discover the truth in this heavenly life. Tell him he can leave. Tell him I believe.
There was a request by one of our members that we stand up and join hands, as we haven't done that in a long time. If you are willing or feel comfortable doing that, or just giving an elbow to somebody, if that feels more comfortable. More words by William Shakespeare to close out our service, and they are, out, out, brief candle.